Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 27th. We have a big show for you. Of course, we're going to be breaking down the NFL, AFC, and NFC Championship games that saw the Eagles and the Chiefs advance to the Super Bowl, setting up a rematch from Super Bowl 57. We'll talk about that, some head coaching news, some quarterback offseason news, and a massive trade in the NHL. We'll go over all of that and more coming up later on in the show for you. But before we get into the Chiefs, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 27th. But like I was saying, we're going to kick off our show here today talking about the second game, the one that sends the Chiefs to their fifth Super Bowl in the last 6 years. That is a crazy streak on its own. To see the Chiefs be this successful is amazing. But let's break down this game real quick. They escape with a win against Buffalo, 32-29. And of course, with the Chiefs, there's going to be some controversy, but we'll get to that later. Starting off this game, the Chiefs just felt like they were never in danger of losing. They ended up surrendering the lead down the stretch, going down 22-21, allowing the Bills to come all the way back from what was an 11-point hole at one point for them. Josh Allen and the Bills had an amazing game. They really did. They were able to keep it close despite Patrick Mahomes being in the 99th percentile for success rate on drop back passes, which is not something we have seen traditionally around the league this year. It's been a much more run-heavy league, something that the Bills really did lean on, the way that they were able to dominate a defense that had not been dominated all season long on the ground. James Cook was having an amazing day. James Cook finishes the day with 16 touches, 13 rushes, finishes with 134 yards, and those two massive touchdowns, one of them to give them a lead on a 4th and goal. That was just an incredible effort play by him to keep the ball in the end zone and keep himself off the ground while diving. It was a crazy play right there by James Cook. He was one of the main reasons why they were in this game, but down the stretch, they took the ball away from him. And in a bubble, I don't necessarily have an issue with that, right? But when you're looking at what's been working all game, and I don't know what it is about Spagnuolo's defense. I don't know what it is about facing the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, but now 2 years in a row, the team that has had success running the ball against this Chiefs team, a vaunted Chiefs defense, one that I think is easily a top 3 defense in the NFL, they've gotten away from running the ball, right? You had a guy in James Cook who was having almost 8 yards a touch when he had the ball in his hands. You did not give the ball to him in the last 6 minutes of the game if you're the Bills. And that is just not a good look for what you're trying to do, trying to beat them for the first time in the playoffs, right? Now Josh Allen is 0-4 in his career against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the playoffs, and the Chiefs reach, again, their 5th Super Bowl in 6 years. They're going for the first ever three-peat in the history of the Super Bowl era. They're already the most successful team to be attempting a three-peat. No team that has won 2 Super Bowls in a row has ever made it back to the Super Bowl. The Chiefs now have a chance to make history. This team is amazing, not because of anything in particular, but because of their roster and their coaching. This is what we see when we talk about a team being complete, right? Up and down this roster, up and down this coaching staff, it's incredible how they have yet to be poached, especially on that coaching staff. I'm surprised Steve Spagnuolo did not get a couple of looks at for some coaching jobs this cycle. Maybe the Saints will have a chance to go get him after the Super Bowl is done. That's something that I think would be interesting, see if he can get back into coaching. But Andy Reid, one of the best coaches of all time, reaches 300 wins in these playoffs. That's incredibly impressive. You have Patrick Mahomes, one of the best quarterbacks of all time. Chris Jones, one of the best active defenders in the entire league. You had Travis Kelce, who's probably going to go down as the best tight end of all time. And people like to talk about luck with this team. But really, a lot of times, what it comes down to is they're not making these mistakes. They're not making the mistakes that lose them the game while every other team is shooting themselves in the foot. Right? They were able to get pressure on Josh Allen. They forced 4 fumbles in this game. They end up losing the turnover battle 1-0 when then they fumble themselves. But still, 4 fumbles forced against the Bills. They didn't end up recovering any of them. But that's generally a good way to win games, punching these balls out, playing good, solid defense. But at the end of the day, there were a couple of controversial calls in this game that I want to get to. Right, starting off with the catch that was called for Xavier Worthy, one that didn't look like a catch to me. Right, into a crowd, Xavier Worthy goes up and gets it. They're hand fighting with the ball. It looks like it hits the ground. The refs, after a challenge, review it and they say it's a catch, right? And that one, I don't think it was. But did it really affect the game? Did either of these two things that were the big controversies really affect the game to the point where they wouldn't have had the chance that the Bills had down the stretch? No, I don't think it did. Would have made it easier for the Bills to win? Sure, I'm sure it would have. But that one in particular, I don't think moved the needle that much. The one that was very interesting was the spot of Josh Allen. On that 4th-and-1 call, 4th-and-inches, they end up running a tush push. He gets stood up there. A bad spot. It goes to review. The spot is just not very good. And it's a turnover on downs there. Now, that one I can understand people thinking, that's going to be a bigger deal because that leads directly to a Kansas City touchdown. Patrick Mahomes doing stuff with his legs that he hasn't been able to do all season long. Patrick Mahomes finished the day 18 for 26, almost 70% passing. 245 yards, a touchdown, and added 2 more touchdowns on the ground. He had a massive day with his legs, which is not something we are expecting, but that was the weakness of this team. That was the weakness of this Bills defense. We talked about it all week long last week when we were previewing that Ravens game, but the thing that was going to get the Bills in trouble was their defense, and they became very, very thin in the secondary, which is why I'm surprised which is why Patrick Mahomes was able to have so much success. Again, that 99th percentile, but I'm surprised they didn't rely on it a little bit more. That you didn't have Tyler Rapp to begin this game. You lose one of your corners to a concussion in the middle of this game. That makes life a whole lot harder for this team that already was by far the worst defense in this matchup. Right? The Chiefs defense, like I said, definitely a top 3 unit, and we've seen the importance of these defenses, right? The Bills defense allowed the Chiefs to get over 30 points for the first time all season. And that seems like a shocking stat, but that Chiefs offense that a lot of times we think of as unstoppable was just playing ball control football a lot of the time. We saw that again in this game, but they were able to, thanks to some short fields, thanks to some special teams plays, they were able to go out there, they were able to get over that 30-point mark, and they were able to find their way to get to yet another Super Bowl. And that's one of the things that I think we need to be applauding this Chiefs team for. Rather than looking for ways to pull them down from their pedestal, we need to look at why this Chiefs team is amazing. And it really is for 2 reasons, right? They're a dynasty, first of all, and the reason they're a dynasty is because of coaching. Andy Reid and what he's been able to instill into this unit. Andy Reid has always been an incredibly successful coach, even in Philly when he had the label of being a playoff choker, or early on in his career with the Kansas City Chiefs, he was labeled as a playoff choker, not being able to get those big wins. Obviously, now that has completely changed with Patrick Mahomes coming in and being as successful as anybody else has been in the history of the NFL to begin their career, right? 7 straight appearances in the AFC Championship game. There has not been a single season where we have where Patrick Mahomes has been the starter and they're not in the AFC Championship game. That's a stat that's only been done once before by Tom Brady, who did it 8 times, and we're looking at a good chance that it's going to happen again. But aside from that, again, that coaching staff is amazing. That's one of the things that I think is being a little bit undervalued here. We've seen a lot more attention on the value of a good coaching staff this season, especially when we take a look at some of the names that have made it this far, right? There's a lot of heat being put on Sean McDermott right now from Bills fans, from people around the media, because he did not have himself a good game, and he's been unable to get over the hump. Do I think Sean McDermott is a guy that needs to get the boot in Buffalo? Absolutely not. He's done an amazing job, especially this year with this team. Josh Allen had a great year, but this was a team that lost so much talent in the offseason. What he was able to do to get the Bills here is nothing short of impressive. We can talk about that Dalton Kincaid play down the stretch, and that is the big one, right? He ends up not making the play. I'm not trying to blame it on him. Steve Spagnuolo just draws up a great blitz, one that gets through that Bills offensive line almost immediately, put Josh Allen under pressure. He makes that throw, which most other quarterbacks in the NFL could not have made. And he's able to go out there and he's able to get it to a spot where Dalton Kincaid could make this play, able to keep this game going. Instead, it falls through his arm, and the Chiefs find a way to just run out the clock there. Samaje Perine makes a big play, and he's able to get that first down, put the Bills out of commission, send them packing for the fourth time in 4 matchups in the playoffs. It was a great game. It was one of those that's going to go down as a real missed opportunity for the Bills. But at the end of the day, trying to find reasons for why this team wasn't winning the game, trying to find reasons for why the Bills are unable to do it, a lot more credit just needs to be given to this Chiefs team. And I have not been seeing that a lot as we look around social media today. They've been trying to blame things. They've been trying to put up conspiracy theories. And that's fine if you want to joke about it, I guess. But if you're being completely serious about it, it's just a non-factor. This Chiefs team is amazing. They have all-time talents at multiple positions, and that coaching staff is one of the best in all of the NFL. And that's why it seems like they can't win. That's why they have that devil magic around them, right? That's why that narrative has been given to them. But they've been playing their best football right now. They've been playing their best offensive football of the season down the stretch here, which I think is something that's really impressive ever since a guy like Hollywood Brown came back, giving them more weapons, giving them the more ability to go out and stretch a defense thinner than they had earlier. Hollywood Brown, since he's been out there, that Chiefs offense has had a noticeable uptick in scoring, and I think they're getting hot at just the right time for the Super Bowl. They have a knack for doing that, but they went out there and they were just simply the better team. The Bills didn't really feel like they had a shot there. Now, they obviously did, but it always felt like the Chiefs were going to find a way to come back and win this game. The Bills lost this one. Chiefs just won. And there's no other conspiracy theory there. But let me know what your thoughts were. I'd love to hear it. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we turn our attention to the other game, the NFC Championship game that saw the Eagles historically dominate the Washington Commanders. We'll talk about that and more coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 27th. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the Chiefs finding a way to get one step closer to a three-peat, their 5th Super Bowl appearance in the last 6 seasons. What they have been able to do this stretch with Patrick Mahomes is nothing short of incredible. give them all of their flowers. In this segment, we turn our attention to the other football game that took place yesterday, the NFC Championship. The Eagles had put a historic beatdown on the Washington Commanders. We'll talk about how we got there, what happened in that game, and much more. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 27th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the second NFL game. The Eagles put a historic beatdown on the Commanders. And when I say it was historic for a lot of different reasons. None of them good for that Commanders defense that just got absolutely run over. And we'll start with history number one. The final score, 55-23. 55 is the most points ever put up by any team in an AFC or NFC championship game in the history of the NFL. What they were able to do against this defense on the ground specifically, 7 touchdowns. That's more touchdowns than the Cowboys had all season on the ground. That's also ties a record for playoff games in the history of the playoff era. That's the most points scored in a playoff game since 2000 when the Jaguars put 62 up on the Miami Dolphins. But what the Eagles were able to do and what they proved in this game is that they are just a dominant force at just about everything they're trying to do. And they had probably the perfect matchup for them. It's one of those things where the Commanders just did not match up very well to this Eagles force, right? This is an Eagles team that has built itself upon running the football. And when the Commanders come in with the third worst run defense in the NFL, it's going to be a long day for them. Along with those 7 touchdowns, they surrendered 239 total rushing yards. If you take out the negative 3 yards that Kenny Pickett had for taking knees, over 240 yards total on the ground given up by this Washington Commanders unit. And it's not like this defense played particularly awful, right? They just got bulldozed. The very first play from scrimmage that the Eagles had on offense was a 60-yard touchdown on a run from Saquon Barkley. Saquon broke a couple tackles, spun past some defenders, and then was just in the clear. And that set the tone for how this game was going to go. Started off with a 7-minute methodical drive by the Commanders that ended in 3 points. Then immediately, the Eagles burst onto the scene and score a touchdown after a pretty good kickoff return from them as well. 60 yards down the field, Saquon Barkley's in the end zone. The Eagles never surrender that lead back. There were times when it was close. The Commanders were able to make it a 2-point game when it was 14-12. They were able to make it one-possession games multiple times when it was 12-20, right? They were able to keep this game close. But at the end of the day, the turnovers really killed this team, and it was the special teams. It was the fumbles on offense. It was the inability to keep the ball in their hand, and some of it was just really good plays by the defense. The De'Ami Brown fumble, the first turnover of the day for the Commanders, that was a really nice play by the linebackers, right? Zach Bond, the All-Pro, goes over and punches the ball out when they're trying to get a couple more yards in a game where they needed those extra couple yards. They needed every single inch that they possibly could have gotten. The next turnover, that's Jeremy McNichols on a kick return. He gets the ball punched out, gives the Eagles a short field instead of giving the Commanders a chance to tie the game with a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. Instead, the Eagles get it back, and they extend the lead all the way up to a 2-possession game after scoring a touchdown on that drive. Then the final one, Austin Eckler. He's driving. He's trying to make a big play on a drive where if the Commanders don't score there, it's all over, especially with the way that the Eagles had been playing. Austin Eckler fumbles. The ball gets hit out right as he's trying to, again, make a play, extend it, get a couple more yards, and they lose that ball again. A theme all postseason long has been whichever team does not turn the ball over generally wins. And that's not some groundbreaking analysis there, obviously. If you give the other team less chances, you're probably going to have a better chance of winning. But it's one of these statements that just it rings true, especially with the style of football that a team like the Eagles plays, like a team like the Chiefs play, like a team like the Bills or the Ravens play when they will run the ball. They will pound your defense. They will continue to get the ball on the ground and chew up clock. You have to play near perfect football. You cannot make those mistakes. And Jaden Daniels, to his credit, played a really good game. Jaden Daniels had that one interceptions in desperation mode in a place where Terry McLaurin almost made a great catch. Quinion Mitchell ends up coming down with it, which was a crazy play in its own right? That is not something that I'm going to put too much on a guy like Jaden Daniels for, but at the end of the day, Saquon Barkley, 3 rushing touchdowns on 15 carries. His first 2 touches of the game both went into the end zone. As I mentioned, that one for 60 and then one for 4 as well. 118 yards on the ground. You had another 3 touchdowns from Jalen Hurts, a really odd sequence in this game where the Eagles had a goal to go situation, and Commanders linebacker Frankie Louvu decided, hey, I'm not going to let them tush push. I'm going to try and guess the snap count. He goes offsides 3 times in a row, and then the refs make a warning. Hey, if you do this again, we're just going to award a touchdown. That's under a rule called the patently unfair rule, right? If a team is doing that, they can just award points at a certain point. The refs decided that it got there. And ultimately, Jalen Hurts gets into the end zone for one of his 3 rushing touchdowns of the day. He had 4 total touchdowns, including a passing touchdown to A.J. Brown, who had a huge day against Marshawn Lattimore. That was the big move that the Commanders made at the trade deadline to go and shore up a defense that was not very good, as we saw in this season. This is a Commanders team that is going to be probably the worst version of themselves. You have a rookie in Jaden Daniels. He's only going to get better, which is a scary thing to think about. You have a defense that is bottom 3 defensively against the run, not much better against the pass, sitting somewhere around 20th overall in scoring defense. This is a Commanders team that will get better. They have a lot of cap space. They're going to be able to draft a couple guys, and this is a team that's going to continue to develop, right? Marshawn Lattimore came in. He's got a couple more years in Washington. He's come in injured, and he's had to go up against some of the toughest receivers in the sport, some big physical guys like A.J. Brown, like Mike Evans throughout this playoff run, and he's done a good enough job, not a great job, but the rest of this Commanders defense just is not up to snuff. This is a Commanders team that, like I said, will continue to get better. And this is an Eagles team that's just going to be dominant. Now you get a powerhouse of a matchup. You get the 2 best teams in football, the Eagles and the Chiefs, going at it. And one of the things that the theme of this season has been how important defense is, right? You're not getting these teams that are offensive juggernauts. As much as the Eagles just did against this Commanders team, they're not putting up 50 points a game. They're not like the Lions, who were averaging 33 points a game on the season. This was an Eagles team and a Chiefs team that has won by playing good, smart football, not making mistakes. This is an Eagles team and a Chiefs team that has won relying a lot on their elite defenses. The Chiefs, I think, have the second best defense, and the Eagles, I think, have the best defense in the league. This is going to be a huge, huge matchup of just whichever one of these defenses can hold the longest, because they're going to get their licks in, right? Both of these teams play a very physical brand of football, both the Eagles and the Chiefs. And I cannot wait for 2 weeks from now when we get to see what a lot of people weren't excited for when we looked at the final 4 teams for potential playoff Super Bowl matchups. But I think at the end of the day, this is the best matchup out there. If the Commanders went in, they were going to get dog walked by the Chiefs or the Bills. Being completely honest with you, we saw that against the Eagles. If the Bills went in, they could make it a game, but we've also seen them get shut down by some defenses in the past, and I don't think the Eagles would have had too much issues going up against this team. They were able to take down the Ravens and shut down their game pretty easy, so I think maybe that one could have been a little interesting. But I think we got what will end up being the best matchup, a rematch from Super Bowl 57. This one should be good. Both of these teams have improved since then, especially on that defensive end where we saw a fireworks show last time out. This time, I think it'll be a little more calm, a little more normal scoring game. But let me know what you thought of this Eagles game, a historic beatdown for them against the Commanders. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the Cowboys have found their next head coach. They promoted former offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer to be their next leading man. We'll talk about that hire, give it a grade, and much more coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 27th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the results of the AFC and NFC title games that took place last night. In this segment, we turn our attention to the big news out of the coaching carousel. The second to last coaching hire has been made as the Cowboys find their next leading man, Brian Schottenheimer, the former offensive coordinator of those Dallas Cowboys. We'll talk about that hire, whether or not it was a good decision, and much more coming up in just a second. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 27th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the third segment of our show. Brian Schottenheimer named the next head coach of America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. They go out there, and after a weird situation under Mike McCarthy, they seem to settle for a Mike McCarthy light, for lack of a better term here, right? Brian Schottenheimer was brought in as the offensive coordinator to replace Kellen Moore, a guy that Jerry Jones had asked them to keep around after the last administration, the last coaching staff, because he liked Kellen Moore. And I don't blame him. Kellen Moore is a guy, one of those offensive gurus that has been highly touted around the league. He now takes the Eagles to a Super Bowl as he's the offensive coordinator over there under Nick Sirianni, right? This is a team that has done really well with and without Kellen Moore, but instead the weird situation surrounding head coach Mike McCarthy, right? Mike McCarthy is supposedly supposed to be kept on. They're talking about a deal. Everything falls through for some reason or other. The Bears ask to go and interview Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy gets the no from the Cowboys, and the Bears are not allowed to interview him. But then his contract runs out, and it puts them a little bit behind the eight ball. They're not going to be able to get those top-tier guys. They're not able to get a guy like Mike Vrabel, who had already been hired. Ben Johnson, basically already been hired, was going to go to one of the two or three places that had already gone and decided, hey, we're going to hire him if he decides to bring us in. This is an interesting move by the Cowboys, and it feels like a lateral or even a downgrade. Brian Schottenheimer is a guy that has no head coaching experience. As Jerry Jones pointed out in his press conference, he was talking about, hey, I'm taking risks here. This guy has never been a head coach in the NFL. So give me a break here, basically, is what he was saying to those reporters. But Brian Schottenheimer isn't a guy that inspires a lot of confidence in me. Brian Schottenheimer, when he gets this job, it just looks like the Cowboys are saying, we wanted Mike McCarthy, but we don't want Mike McCarthy. They couldn't agree to terms, and the exact reason has not come out yet. But hiring his offensive coordinator for a guy who was already an offensive coach, it's not going to change too much. They're just basically bringing in what would have been an interim coach if they had hired him if they had fired Mike McCarthy in the middle of the season. Now, I think this is due to the fact that they had this very shortened coaching cycle, and Brian Schottenheimer is a guy that I don't think is necessarily going to be a bad head coach, but there are other options out there. There's other guys, other retread options that I think would have been more interesting. Going after a guy like Pete Carroll, who I still think late in that process they could have been able to lure out of Vegas. Instead, he goes over there. There's a bunch of guys that I think would be more interested in this Cowboys job because it's not a bad job, right? And I think the fact that they're stuck or they settled for Brian Schottenheimer might key into where that organization is heading right now. They don't have a lot of cap space. They don't have a great draft pick. They're locked into Dak Prescott and a lot of those other stars. If you don't think you can build around that, if you don't think you can build this team despite its huge market, despite its huge market share, it's not going to be a super desirable coaching job. And I think that's what we saw, despite, again, this being America's team. Overall, this is not a very inspiring hire. This is one that I look at, and I'm looking at a team that had a very disappointing season. Blame injury, blame coaching, blame whatever you want. At the end of the year, those guys were really rallying behind Mike McCarthy. You let him go just to bring on the offensive coordinator who was already in the building. I don't see that working out too well for the Cowboys. And that's not to say that Brian Schottenheimer can't be a good head coach. That's not to say that he couldn't work out somewhere else. But when your general manager / owner is in the introductory press conference calling your new head coach a career assistant, a career coordinator, it's not a good sign. It's not a good start to his tenure over there, and he could prove me wrong because he is a guy that's been around the league for a very long time. He's a guy that has these relationships, is already in that building. They don't need to establish a new culture, but kicking out the head honcho just for the second in command doesn't make a lot of sense to me unless Jerry Jones wanted to save a buck or two. And at that point, it's just not worth doing. Overall, I'm going to give this one a C-. It's a very neutral lateral move for the Cowboys here. They didn't have a lot of other options, though. It didn't seem like a job that a lot of those top-tier coaching candidates were really interested in going to. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers had their end-of-season press conference today. Art Rooney, the owner of the Steelers, talked a little bit about the team's future in the quarterback position. We're going to talk about that, what he said, and much more coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found. For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 27th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the 5th of 6 open coaching hires for the head coaching carousel in this year's NFL offseason, talking about the Cowboys bringing on Brian Schottenheimer, their former offensive coordinator, as their new head coach. In this segment, we turn our attention to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've had a very interesting start to the offseason. Questions about the future of their head coach, Mike Tomlin, what they're going to do at the quarterback position that has plagued them for so long. We'll talk about what Art Rooney, the owner, said today in his end of season press conference, and much more coming up in just a second. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 27th. But like I was saying, we're going to get into the Pittsburgh Steelers and their offseason situations. One of the main points that I thought was interesting was the question to Art Rooney trying to decide or figure out what the plan is for the quarterback position. Now, obviously, this is the owner. He's not making these football decisions, but they do have meetings with the GM. So this is going to give a little bit of insight of how this offseason is going to go, especially at that quarterback position. He basically said they would like to re-sign one of the two that they have on the roster, that being Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. One of those two, and they'd like it to be a multi-year deal. Now, they both came to the Steelers in very different sets of circumstances. They were both down from where they were supposed to be. Obviously, Justin Fields, recently picked out of Ohio State in the first round, was on the Bears for a while, did not work out the way that the Bears expected him to. They dumped him off to the Steelers and went and got Caleb Williams. Russell Wilson started off his career amazing, was a late-round pick to the Seahawks, won a Super Bowl over there with Pete Carroll. Then he gets traded to the Broncos, and everything starts to go downhill. Gets paid a lot of money, then gets traded over to the Pittsburgh Steelers on a veteran minimum contract. After the Broncos cut him, they pick him up there. The starter this season started off as Justin Fields due to an injury, and he had a pretty good year. He went 4-1 on the season. He wasn't doing anything fantastic or special. Then you bring in Russell Wilson. He becomes the starter for the rest of the season, leads them to the playoffs, kind of struggles down the stretch. So neither of these options are one of them, are ones that I'm looking at and saying, oh, I'm super inspired by the future of this team. Again, there were talks after this season about the future of Mike Tomlin, one of the best coaches in the NFL. How his future would be with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mike Tomlin has one of the most impressive records in all of the NFL for never having a losing season over 20 years in the NFL as a head coach. That is incredible. But recently, they've been stuck around 500, around the purgatory of football, barely making the playoffs, getting absolutely destroyed in the first round, especially since the 7 seed was added as an extra bonus playoff spot. The Steelers are kind of stuck in the mud. They're grinding their gears here, and I don't know if this move to keep Justin Fields or keep Russell Wilson is really the option. But we'll go down is really the best option for this team. But we'll go down each road here, right? We'll start with the one that I think, especially talking a multi-year deal, the one that I think makes the most sense for this Steelers team. Keeping Justin Fields. Justin Fields came in, and what he was able to do this season was add that extra little bonus for that team of offense that they didn't really have in the seasons past. His ability on the ground with his legs, his ability to extend plays, and his ability to find guys out of the structure when the play breaks down behind that Steelers offensive line. Now, he's not the best at that. He isn't Patrick Mahomes when it comes to making plays like that. He's not Josh Allen, but his mobility and his that extra dimension that he adds, that rushing upside, is something that I think a lot of teams are looking for. And I think keeping Justin Fields around, if you're going to keep one of those two and have them be that starter, especially on a multi-year deal, that's the one I think you should focus on. Russell Wilson is an interesting one because Russell Wilson is a guy that I think is going to get courted by a lot of different teams. The Raiders, I've heard a lot of talk after they hire Pete Carroll. That's one that I think could be really interesting for him. He goes over there, gets to work with his old head coach in a situation that's probably just as good, maybe a little bit worse than the Pittsburgh Steelers, but they've got a lot of money over there to go help and build a team. So maybe that's something that Russell Wilson is looking at. If Russell Wilson stays, as both him and Justin Fields have said in their press conferences after the season that they would like to stay in Pittsburgh if given the chance, then this team looks, I think, the same, which is not what you want, right? This team needs a shakeup at the quarterback position. I think if the Steelers are going to continue down this track, the fans are going to continue to be unhappy, right? They'll have success. Mike Tomlin will coach this team with how good its defense is. They'll coach this team to a winning record, to potentially a 7 seed in the playoffs, but it's not going to be anything that really leads to long-term success. It's not going to be anything that you take a look at and you say they've done a really good job this offseason. I think this offseason is really crucial for them. We've seen this little tepper of a chant to get Mike Tomlin out of the building start to grow and grow and continue to grow until now we're getting a lot of public sentiment. Some of these big networks, ESPN, some of these personalities on there are saying you need to let Mike Tomlin go. And I don't necessarily think it's going to be a bad thing for Mike Tomlin if they let him go, because he'll land on his feet. He's got a really good reputation. He'll go find another job. But for the Steelers, I think it would put them into a tailspin. They've done a really good job of finding head coaches. You're not going to find a guy like that just super easy, right? But if you continue to spin your wheels, you continue to stay stuck in the mud with this quarterback situation, it's not going to get any better. In fact, it's only going to get worse. They've been trying their best keeping that defense intact, and they have the money to spend, but I think now is the time that they go out there and they make a big splash at the quarterback position. Whether that means keeping Justin Fields and also going out and getting someone, whether that be later in the draft, getting a guy like a Jackson Dart, or whether that be in free agency, trying to target a guy like Kirk Cousins if the Falcons do decide to cut him, or maybe even trade for him. Maybe they go out and give a chance to Aaron Rodgers, get these veteran quarterbacks, and I know that doesn't seem like the table for them, but they need something that will really move them forward rather than keep them stuck here. I think the move for them is probably going to be to re-sign Justin Fields, give him that 3-4 year deal, not super huge money, so it's not going to be a huge investment. But then I would like them to go draft a quarterback. If they're going to continue to just roll out Justin Fields as their starter and say, that's good enough, which it'll be good enough. But at the end of the day, these players are getting older, right? The guys that are pushing them to this successful winning season every year, they're getting older. They're not going to be able to stay in the NFL at this shape forever, right? You need to be able to go get that guy that you can rely on. Go get the next Big Ben in Pittsburgh. Go get someone that can go out and win your team a Super Bowl. Because as it stands right now, this team with this quarterback situation is not winning a Super Bowl. And they really are a team that's a quarterback away. We talk about it all the time. The Jets are a quarterback away. The Broncos were a quarterback away. The Steelers are a quarterback away. But this is a team that truly is a quarterback away with how talented the rest of this roster is. And I hate to see talent get wasted like that. I think they need to make a big swing. This is probably not the draft to do it, but go and make a swing in this draft, either a late round or potentially next year if the same things happens. They go out and they trade up, trying to make a big trade, trying to get into the top 10 to potentially get their quarterback of the future. Not this year, because there really isn't that guy this year, but next year potentially, depending how the draft falls out. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Who do you think the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to go with? Do they take a risk and swing on Sam Darnold potentially, someone that just had a huge season over there in Minnesota? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we finish off our show with some news from the NHL. A massive trade has just taken place between contenders. Not something we see too often. We'll talk about what that was and what it means for those two teams at the top of their respective leagues. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, January 27th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over what the Steelers' future quarterback might look like this offseason. In this segment, we turn our attention to the NHL. That season is just over halfway done at this point, and the first massive trade of the trade deadline has occurred. Mikko Rantanen and a couple of other players have been traded to the Carolina Hurricanes from the Avs and the Blackhawks. A massive trade from contenders at the top here. We'll talk about how that affects everyone in the league going forward from this blockbuster surprising trade. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, January 27th. But like I was saying, we're going to talk a little bit of hockey here. It's been a while since we talked about hockey, probably since the beginning of the season, but a major blockbuster trade has just taken place in the NHL, right? The Carolina Hurricanes, second place in the Eastern Conference, and the Colorado Avalanche. Both of these teams are going to be playoff bound. Both of them are trying to win a cup this year. The Carolina Hurricanes, an incredibly talented team, add two major pieces on the offensive end, getting Mikko Rantanen, the player who over the last 4 years in the NHL has the fifth most points in all of hockey. He is not a guy that's going to be considered one of those top 5 guys. He's one of those surprise names, but he's got more points than Austin Matthews. He's got more points than plenty of other all-star caliber players. He is number 5 over the last 4 seasons, and now he goes over to the Carolina Hurricanes, who have some of the deepest forward cores in all of the NHL. But it's not just him that gets sent over. Taylor Hall, the former Vezina Trophy winner or the MVP of the NHL, gets sent over as well from the Chicago Blackhawks. This is a trade that ended up being 3 teams because they needed a facilitator in the Blackhawks, but the Blackhawks don't get much here. They get a 2025 third-round pick, and they're eating half of Mikko Rantanen's salary. Now, they're a team that's bottom-feeding this year, so they're getting rid of some assets, trying to get some trade pieces, trying to get some guys, and eating a lot of salary. That's the kind of role that a lot of these teams have to play when they're trying to get some stuff done. But for them to get that little and give up a piece, yes, an expiring contract in Taylor Hall, but to just get a third and eat some salary, I feel like that was a weird trade for them to make. The Avalanche, they don't get nothing back. For a guy like Mikko Rantanen, who's also on his last year of his contract talks have not been going well between the two sides, but for a contender to contender trade, you don't usually see that, even if that team isn't going to be able to re-sign them. They get Martin Necas, right? He is the points leader for the Carolina Hurricanes this season. The Carolina Hurricanes, who have a very high-powered offense, as well as Jack Drury, who's a really good depth piece for them. Right now, we look at that line for the Carolina Hurricanes, and they're chasing only the Capitals in the East right now. They're trying to get that President's Trophy, that number 1 overall seed in the East, and they've come oh so close these last couple years. They're the team that, if you look on paper, is probably the most talented one in the entirety of the NHL. The Capitals have some firepower over there, but the Canes, what they've been able to do, what they've been able to build is nothing short of incredibly impressive, right? You take a look up and down that roster, Mikko Rantanen, Sebastian Aho, and Jackson Blake on that first line. And the second line, you've got Svechnikov and Taylor Hall as well with the new additions. You can go all the way down to the third and fourth lines, and this team continues to have big names all up and down that roster. The defense continues to be as amazing as well. But the question in my head when I took a look at this trade was, why would the Avalanche do this? Aside from obviously the fact that, they're not going to be able to re-sign him, they didn't seem to get enough back. And sure, Martin Necas is a guy that has been really good this season for the Canes. he's not a guy that's on the same level as Rantanen for me. Both of those guys have been really good this year. But Rantanen is a guy that I think has much more high upside than a guy like Martin Necas has. And I think really at the end of the day, the Avalanche, they got something back, which usually you don't get. There's not too often scenarios where you get a contender trading with another contender, especially with some names as big as these. Usually you got to go poach some talent from the teams that are sellers. These are both going to be buyers at the deadline, and I would consider both of these moves to be considered a buying move. But the big question mark in this one is why the Blackhawks would decide to facilitate this trade. They didn't get anything of really value in this, and they gave up one of their key trade pieces in Taylor Hall. Taylor Hall is a guy who's been bouncing around the league. He was on the Bruins last season. Like I said, he won a Vezina trophy a couple years ago, was the first overall pick in the draft to the Edmonton Oilers, and he's been all over the place. That's a guy that if the Blackhawks are trying to get some assets for, they could probably get a good amount, some good prospects. Instead, they trade him for essentially a 2025 third-round pick. That's it. Taylor Hall is not the Vezina winning trophy guy that he was, but he's a guy that would be a really good second or third line forward on a contending team. And I think the Blackhawks could have gotten a lot more for him. Instead, they just kind of sell him at a discount. And I don't really get what this Blackhawks team is doing. They've got Connor Bedard down there, but outside of that, this team has really failed to build around him. I know it's still early on in his career, and Connor Bedard has done his job. He's been amazing. He's been an amazing player all year long, but they need to continue to build some pieces around him, and they're not going to be able to do that if they're selling the trade pieces for as low as they are right now. I don't understand why the Blackhawks did it. I think this trade works really well, especially for the Canes, and I think it pushes them into that true contender tier. As far as the Avs go, I think they lost a little bit on this one, but still, at the end of the day, if the depth can come in, and if Martin Necas can come in and continue to be that scoring threat that he has been all season long for the Canes, this is one that's going to work out for them. This is one that we look at, and they weren't going to be able to re-sign Mikko Rantanen, but that's one that really hurts, especially as we head into the playoffs where the Avs still haven't really locked up their spot in a really hotly contested Western Conference. So I'm not sure how well that move is going to age, but they are still Cup contenders, and I think it'll be close. In other hockey news, Logan Thompson, the goalie for the Capitals, has inked a 6-year extension. He was on a 1-year deal, him and Charlie Lindgren, the two Capitals goalies who have had incredible seasons. But what Logan Thompson has been able to do after coming over from Las Vegas, winning a Stanley Cup over there, has been incredible. He's been one of the better goalies in the league. He had 2 shutouts last week, and he was the goalie of the week. He's currently in that goaltender of the year conversation, and the Capitals locking him up is huge. This is a team that barely snuck into the playoffs last year, but thanks to goaltender play here in this season and a resurgent offense and a lot of young guys that have come in and some moves that they've made this offseason, Capitals currently are in control of that President's Trophy, the best record in all of the NHL. So we'll see what ends up happening. Overall, these moves, I think, work for almost all the teams involved. I just don't understand what the Chicago Blackhawks are doing in this deal and why they decided to facilitate it. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them. And thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We'll be back tomorrow talking all of the major news from around the world of sports. I can't wait to see you guys then. You have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.